Today, we're fortunate to host Tracy Sinclair, somebody who I actually found my certificate from the first time I worked with Tracy, which was getting on to 10 years ago now. When I'd first qualified as a coach, I'd first done the training, and Tracy, I joined one of the supervision classes in London many moons ago. Tracy is, in my opinion, not so humble. I don't think anybody would believe that of me, but absolutely one of the best coaches out there. She was awarded one of the leading global coaches in the Thinkers 50. She's been the president of the ICF, both in the UK and globally, the treasurer for the ICF, and today works as what I don't really understand, but I'm probably going to quiz her one day, the director at large for the ICF. We're very happy to have you here, Tracy, so thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts with us. This evening, it's a conversation, fair to say, rather than a talk.
It's hopefully a little bit of both.
A little bit of both. Brilliant. About coaching leaders through uncertainty, something that is very of the now. Without further ado, I'd love to welcome Tracy. I invite you to begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. And thank you all so much for coming this evening. It's really lovely to connect with all of you and have such a nice audience to talk with. Our topic this evening is coaching leaders through uncertainty, and I scratched my head for quite a long time thinking about exactly what to share and talk about this evening, because there are so many different angles that we could take to this topic. And so just to sort of set expectations right from the beginning, I'm not necessarily expecting that we'll cover everything we possibly could about this topic, because it's, you know, coaching is very broad and leadership is very broad. And at the moment, uncertainty is quite broad as well. So, you know, we're talking about the combination of three pretty big topics. But I've got some information to share with you, which I hope and I believe that you will find interesting. I'm going to go through that relatively quickly, partly because I want to get to the dialogue bit and for us to actually have more of a conversation. But also because some of the information I've got to share with you is quite swift, some of it's quite visual, so I can share a few slides with you. But what I did want to say is that the slides are going to be made available for you anyway afterwards. So if there's any data in these that you think, oh, that looks quite interesting, then you should get a copy of these slides, and that hopefully will be a good resource for you as well. So my hope is that, I think we've got an hour together in total this evening. My hope is I'll get through some of this information fairly swiftly. If as you go through, it's a little bit difficult, I guess, with so many people for me to be able to see who might be raising their hand or something while I'm talking. But if you do have questions while I'm actually going through the material, please do feel free to pause and maybe ask a question if you want to. But I do want to allocate a chunk of time anyway at the end, so we can actually have a bit of a dialogue about this. And the reason why I think that's really important is because I truly believe that the collective wisdom in our virtual room that we have got here is really quite phenomenal, and I'd love to really hear your thoughts and perspectives, because they are equally as valuable as mine. But hopefully I'll have some useful information to share. So I'll share my screen, if I may, and dive into some of this information, and then we'll catch up in a moment and have a chat about it. Okay, so let me just share my screen. Okay. All right. So I'm not going to spend really any time on this. I'm not into huge introductions myself, but the one thing I would say is that what you might notice in the list of, these are the hats that I sort of wear, is the word coach comes up quite a lot of times. And so really my world is revolved around delivering coaching, but also supporting other people to learn how to coach and bring coaching into our world in some way. A lot of the work that I do is grounded in the organisational space, supporting leadership and organisational culture to develop through coaching skills. But I also have a really strong interest in the use of coaching skills in education. For example, I do a lot of work in schools and teaching teachers coaching skills, as well as teaching pupils coaching skills. I also have a very keen interest in taking this into young leaders, so the 18 to 25 group, so the future leaders, if you like. And also as an ex-addiction therapist myself, in a previous life, I have a very strong interest in mental health and how coaching can straddle the coaching sort of counselling boundary, and how coaching can be of support to, in some ways, mitigate against mental health rather than actually treat mental health, which again, resilience, mental health and well-being are topics that are really fundamental at the moment in the world. So that's just maybe a little bit about what I do. As John said, I've been volunteering for the ICF for a long time. All of these board roles and things are volunteer roles, because the ICF is a volunteer organisation. And the one thing that, one of the many things I love about doing that work is the fact that it does give me access to an awful lot of really useful information about how coaching is being used around the world, what the trends are, and how coaching is evolving, because it is still a pretty young profession. So my hope is that I can bring some of that to the table today, as well as my own personal experience. In this webinar, what I'd like to talk to you about is just give a little bit of a snapshot of coaching, and really, as John and I were talking about earlier, what is the how is coaching defined by a profession like the International Coaching Federation, which is the largest professional body for coaching? The reason I think that's quite important is not to say that it's the right and only definition of coaching, because that's certainly not the case, but coaching is still a rather vague and nebulous way of working in some areas. For example, in some sectors, coaching actually means mentoring. In some sectors, coaching means developing people's skills by teaching them. And in some spaces, coaching means performance managing people. So this term of coaching is used quite differently. So I just want to ground us into where I'm coming from, and from an ICF perspective, what coaching is. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the leadership challenges that are being noticed, surfacing by myself, my colleagues, and also from what we're noticing in the ICF system. And it'll be interesting to see how this is similar or different to what you are noticing, because I'm sure some of you already are operating as coaches in the field as well. And one of the biggest challenges is, to sort of give a little bit of the hint away, is change. Is just the amount of and size of change. And so I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between coaching and change, and the impact that coaching can have. And then also a little bit more hot off the press, some information that around COVID and the impact of COVID on coaching. And at the end, I've got some links to some resources for you where you could access more of this data if you want to. If you're really into research and data, then you'll love the links at the end. So that's what we're looking at. The definition of coaching from an ICF perspective is partnering with clients in a thought-provoking and creative process that inspires them to maximise their personal and professional potential. So there's some really key words in here. Partnering is an important word. So the philosophy is that coaching is an equal, mutual, respectful partnership, relationship, rather than a hierarchical relationship. The whole purpose of coaching is to evoke new thought. And it's the newness of thought that is therefore creative and innovative for someone. So there's not a lot of point in having a coaching conversation with someone that just regurgitates existing thinking, because they could do that themselves probably. The idea is that we are trying to support the person to have the space to move beyond their current thinking so that they can actually think about new strategies, new ways of thinking, feeling and behaving. And then this idea of inspires is important as well. Coaching is meant to be something that is developmental, is forward moving for people so that they feel energized to maximize the potential that they have, whether it's in a personal or a professional setting. To give you a feel for what the profession of coaching is currently looking like, the ICF in 2020 did the largest global coaching survey ever undertaken by any organisation across the world. So this is a really good snapshot of what's going on. And it shows that there are 71,000 people that actively call themselves officially coach practitioners. That's of course what we know. There are many other people out there calling themselves coaches who we're not aware of and aren't necessarily trained in coaching. But this is actually a marked increase since 2015, which was the last time this survey was done. And so the marketplace or the profession of coaching has grown by 33% in that time. The biggest rise is actually in the use of coaching skills by managers and leaders. So coaching used to be something that was done by other people, but now it's realised that coaching is a way of working and a skill that is needed inside the system, inside the organisation. And of course, managers and leaders are the primary targets and sources of focus for that. So the annual revenue at the moment from coaching is across the world is about $2.8 billion. So it's quite sizable. It's growing rapidly. And what's interesting is that these last two pieces here have remained quite constant for the last few years, which is that 85% of the people involved in this kind of survey agree or strongly agree that some kind of credential or qualification in coaching is expected. And this is the key trend that is really being noticed now, that people are not able to just call themselves a coach because they've been around the block for a few years and they leave their corporate life and they just say they want to become a coach. Some people are doing that and are doing it well. Other people are doing that and are probably not offering, particularly great value. And so in an unregulated market, which coaching currently is, it's more self-regulated, the market pressure is driving this standard and rigor, and more people buying coaching services and using coaching services are starting to say, what credentials, what qualifications do you have? And on the flip side, similarly to that, the biggest perceived risk, therefore, to the profession is untrained people who are calling themselves coaches. The typical kinds of things that people bring into coaching. So let's just take current circumstances to one side. These items here are very, very consistently the kinds of things that people are going to bring into coaching conversations. It's usually about performance. There's often a lot about communication skills. Often people will want to engage with coaching when they're at a crossroads or an opportunity for a new career path. Confidence, self-esteem, self-belief often comes up. Increasingly, the work-life balance piece comes up. And then because coaching is often used by small business owners, improved business management comes up as well. So how does this compare, this normal generic list of what's brought into coaching? How does that compare with what's currently being brought into coaching? I'd be really interested to hear your views on this in a moment. Is that what we're really noticing is that it's the size and pace of change that with everything that's going on that is just overriding everybody's experience at the moment. And so these are the kinds of things that are being noticed that leaders are wanting to explore in a coaching context. This sense of just not knowing what to do, which for many leaders, if you look at the traditional model of leadership, or many traditional models of leadership, leaders are supposed to know what to do. They're supposed to lead people somewhere. Therefore, they're supposed to know where to go and how to get there. And of course, this supposed to has gone out of the window, because in many, many cases, leaders are just as much at a loss as everybody else. And so that, for a leader whose sense of identity is built on knowing, leading, setting direction, can be a very, very destabilizing place to be. So there's a lot of potential vulnerability, more vulnerability perhaps almost coming through with leadership coaching than we may even have seen before. So it's really something to bear in mind. The other thing that's really coming up is engagement and motivation. With the virtual setting, and hopefully that will subside soon, but with just this virtual way of the world being, many leaders are struggling for understanding how they keep their teams connected and motivated, but also how do they keep themselves motivated. So, and that is often the slightly more covert challenge. The focus is on how do I motivate my team, when in fact some of these leaders are actually feeling really disengaged and unmotivated themselves. So there's a lot of well-being issues coming up, a lot of well-being issues, and quite often, in a way, and I'm smiling here because this is what my colleague and business partner Hilary would call with the lazy coach, is that in some cases clients don't actually want any coaching at all. They just want some space. There's often just the need for some quiet, private, confidential space to breathe, to reflect, and just to share, to download and have their anxieties, their concerns, their confusion voiced and witnessed actually. Navigating and handling priorities is another really important area that seems to be coming up, because everything seems to be so chaotic. A lot of leaders are reporting an inability to just really know what to focus on first. And so coaching can really support people with trying to see the wood for the trees almost, and really focus on what's the right thing to do today. Linked to that, there's this sense also that time frames and time boundaries are very different, in that typically perhaps a leader is projecting towards a 3-year strategy or a 12-month plan or even a quarterly plan. And at the moment, those kinds of way into the future timelines seem to be almost too far because of the level of uncertainty. And so one of the things in coaching that seems to have really helped is inviting leaders to really think about, what can you achieve today? What can you actually achieve and make happen today or this week, rather than in next quarter? Of course, all of these challenges can lead to a loss of confidence. So the confidence piece is very important, and what might be the leaders' belief systems, limiting beliefs that they're having. How could they reframe those beliefs and engage with more empowering beliefs? So a lot of perhaps, as well as the practical work of strategies to engage people, strategies to prioritize, there's also a sense of that deeper work as well on, what is it that I really need to do to tap into my best self, and what is the kind of thinking and feeling that is helpful to me or not helpful to me as a leader. And then, like with many things, COVID is, or many people rather, COVID is leading a lot of people to just review life generally. So there's a lot of conversations that we're noticing that are much more philosophical conversations, where people are saying, do you know what, I don't know if I want my life to be like this. I maybe want to take a completely different stance on my life. So big reviewing of life goals is also coming up as well. So these are the kinds of coaching conversations and coaching topics that seem to be coming through. But let's talk a little bit more about change and this probably very overused term of VUCA and this state of volatility that we're in. Of the surveys and the research that I'm drawing from for this, which you'll see referenced in the footers, and you've got the links to some of this at the end. 77% of HR practitioners rather, and leaders have actually reported that their organisations are in a state of constant change, and this was actually pre-COVID. So you can imagine if this state of volatility and change was already there, and we also know how destabilising change can be for people, then COVID has just added on a whole nother layer of pressure and complexity. And I'm sure some of these stats aren't unfamiliar to some of you who are very well versed and experienced in project and change management. But in this particular survey, 85% of organisations reported that their change management initiatives had been unsuccessful. So, I think we already know quite well that, generally speaking, human beings are not always particularly great at handling change initiatives. And so we do need support. We need practitioners like yourselves to really support people to facilitate that process. And this is where coaching comes in. So what's interesting is if you look at the kinds of activities that people use to facilitate change, they often will do a lot of training. Now, classroom training is less relevant at the moment. There's going to be much more of that is going to be web and e-based learning now, of course, for obvious reasons. But one of the biggest responses from organisations when change is happening is to train people, to upskill them. There's often also a lot more FaceTime and connection with senior leaders, as well as a lower percentage here, you'll see access to managers and leaders using coaching skills. So what's interesting is these are the things that people do, and yet they're not necessarily the things that work. What actually works are these things, because organisations that have reported effectively navigating significant change have reported doing these activities here, and you'll see it's quite different. And coaching comes up really quite significantly. So, for example, if you look at number 6 there, the access to managers with coaching skills, in the previous slide, only 38% of organisations stated that they had that and made that available, and yet 70% of the time it's viewed to be successful. So there's a real disparity between, in organisations at least, what people think will work and what actually really does work. And so part of our role as practitioners can also be to continually support organisations and help educate organisations around really what does and doesn't work. Organisations that do use coaching tend to report these kinds of improvements, and the percentages really are the amount of organisations that said they saw an uplift in these areas. And if you think about change, if you've got better teamwork, you've got better engagement, people are being productive, you've got leaders that are able to develop fluidly through an organisation, etc., then all of these things are going to drive towards more effective change. And then, interestingly, we come to this area that's called strong coaching culture. And of the organisations that were used for this particular survey, just pre-COVID, 15% of these organisations were shown to have what is called a strong coaching culture. Now, I won't go into that in too much detail now because that would take us off down a whole nother avenue, but there are certain characteristics that define a culture that has a strong coaching infusion and where coaching is being used strategically as a resource. And there are a few of them. It's new. There's not that many of them still, but they're starting to grow and get stronger. And what's interesting is that those organisations that have a strong coaching culture, about 61% of them are also what's classified as a high-performing organisation. Now, once again, I'm not going to go into too much detail about that tonight, but just to give you an indication, high-performing organisations, or HPOs, is a term that's defined by one of the partners to ICF, which is the Human Capital Institute, which is one of the largest human capital research houses in the world. And they have established some metrics that, again, are characteristics that define high-performing organisations. I'll show you a couple of examples in a moment. But you'll see that the organisations that have strong coaching cultures are going to be the organisations that are much, much, much more likely to be high performing. So what we see is a strong correlation between coaching leading to more effective change management, leading to a more high-performing organisation. So there's a real domino effect that starts to happen at the systemic level. And then I'll go through this really quickly because you'll see these slides when you want to have a look at the detail in a bit more closely. But on the HPOs, they have what's called business outcomes and talent outcomes, and these are the examples of the talent outcomes. And the organisations that have high performing cultures and use coaching to underpin that have basically seen this percentage of change and improvement in these areas over the past 2 years before they were surveyed. So you see that the people as a resource thrive, function, and are more engaged in an organisation that is high performing and in an organisation that has a good coaching culture. So it's attractive to talent, it's attractive to retain talent, to develop talent, and to have that talent therefore contribute actively within the organisation. And if you look at the business metrics, similarly, these are the key business outcomes, the 8 business outcomes, where once again, high performing organisations have noticed an uplift of this percentage in these kinds of areas. So this was quite fundamental actually, because it's identified how coaching is not just a soft skill, it's not just a fluffy nice to have, and it's not just a chat. Coaching as a really, really strategic resource does support people and develop people, but it also has some really, really tangible outcomes to important business metrics as well. And then lastly, just before we pause and maybe open up some dialogue, I'd like to just share a little bit about the impact of COVID. So this survey was done last year, probably about this time last year, actually, when COVID first hit, if you like. And there is, interestingly, another repeat of this survey happening as we speak to get another snapshot, and that will be turned around quite quickly. And if any of you are interested in contributing to that survey, then I'd really encourage you to do so. And we can arrange to get you a link to join into that survey. It's the only coaching COVID survey that we're aware of in the world, and it's done in collaboration with the ICF and PricewaterhouseCoopers. So you'll see here that, interestingly, the overall impact of coaching, of COVID on coaching is in fact perceived to have a limited negative impact, mostly. And part of this is because people are really starting to realise that actually coaching is in the face of a crisis, coaching is starting to come into its own. If you go back to something like the ICF's vision of coaching, which is that it's an integral part of a thriving society, we're certainly not a thriving society right now, but that is the whole purpose of coaching. And so there's something that's coming through where people are really saying this is the time where coaching skills are desperately needed and are really, really starting to come into their own. And then you'll also see here another snapshot from the report that I've shared with you is coaching as a whole will emerge stronger from the pandemic. So you'll see that, very largely speaking, with the green and amber or green and yellow bars here, which is that people are either somewhat or very confident, there is a strong sense that even though there is an element of budgets being cut, people not having time for coaching and things like that, that actual impact is small in comparison to then the surge that is coming through, where coaching is now being seen as quite a vital resource. However, on the flip side, what is interesting, I think is just important to be aware of, is that this whole situation with coaching and COVID is disrupting the marketplace quite a bit. And what we're noticing, and I'm noticing this very much in my business, I'm getting a lot of requests for the offering of pro bono or free coaching services within organisations, largely in the charitable and non-for-profit sector, but even in some smaller businesses as well, where they realise the need for coaching, but they just don't have the budget. So the pricing of coaching is already something that has been fluctuating. It's really difficult to say what the price parameters are of coaching, because it really is like a piece of string. But we can talk about that if anyone's interested in the questions in a moment. But what is noticed as a trend is that fees are starting to level out a little bit. And interestingly, there's a correlation between coaches who are able to command still, higher fees, are the ones who have credentials and strong qualifications and credibility in that profession. And then my last slide is really just for you to know that these are the resources that I've drawn upon. When you get the slides, if you would like to have a look at some of these things, then they're the links to the various different pieces of research that I've shared with you. Some of them might be of interest for you to look at a little bit more. Some of the research, just because of the amount of time and effort that goes into doing them, some of the reports have to be paid for. Some of the executive summaries are for free, and ICF members get certain access to things for free, whereas non-members have to pay for things. So I can't say that all of that is available for free to everyone, but some of them are just really, really good sources of information. And I've got access to all of these myself, so I'm very happy to share any specific pieces with people if that's helpful. So I'm going to stop there so that I can actually connect with you and talk a little bit about this. A bit of a whistle-stop tour through some information, but I'd love to open up a dialogue and let's talk about this. So I've seen there's some things in the chat, so should I just have a quick look and see if there are any questions coming through, or has anyone noticed any questions that might be useful here?
So one question For those of us who love a bit of data from Russ Lewis, how many respondents to the survey? I did a quick bit of Googling, and it looks to be 430-ish.
That's right, 432, I think it is. And that's organisational respondents. Yeah, because it's an organisational piece. Thank you, John.
And the only, so Stuart's asked, what's VUCA? For those who haven't come across it, it's a military term for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. The only other thing I noticed is, Tracy, you've got your fan club here. Femi, you're not one of the best, you are the best coach. There he is. I can see him.
Femi, I'm going to have to start paying you. I really
Yes,
am.
you will.
I will.
No, I mean, it's just a fair comment about, my journey started when I attended ACSM and CSBSM with John McFadden and Kareem, John. Somewhere along the line when we had our coaching triad, I had that aha moment, that light bulb moment, and I spoke to John. I said, I'd like to know a little bit more about this. Who can you recommend? And yours was top of the list. I think there were a couple of other trainers, but I didn't even bother investigating those further after I spoke with you. So
you chose wisely, Femi, I can say. You chose wisely.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel.
I've got my fan club here.
Yeah, I shall send my bank details on WhatsApp, darling.
Absolutely. And I'm on your course right now, on your journey. So need say no more. I'm on your journey. So there you have it. Thank you,
Femi. So I'd love to hear any questions you might have, any observations from what you're noticing in your work, anything that you'd like to share, really.
I've got a question. I have a question, or is someone else speaking?
Go ahead, Rochelle.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it was just so those planning horizons are shortening. You're saying the planning horizons are shortening, and the decisions seem to be more short term, so kind of more incremental. Do you think the changes that you're kind of seeing kind of help organizations gravitate towards a kind of agility through survival, through need? Whereas before, organizations have sometimes been reticent to be agile from an enterprise perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a really great observation, Rochelle, and I'd love to hear other people's perspectives as well. But I would actually agree, because I don't know about so much about the agile world, but I know in the coaching world we are sometimes having to really bang the drum about the benefits of coaching. And, maybe as agile coaches, you sometimes have to bang the drum to say, actually, do you know what? You ought to be more agile. You'd be it would be good for you if you were more agile. And I think that this situation is thrusting people into not having an awful lot of choice about that. So I would say that, every cloud has a silver lining, doesn't it? Apparently. I think there's an opportunity for agile in what's going on at the moment, because it's that the environment is lending itself very much to people having to be agile in their way of thinking, and different ways of looking at timescales, strategy plans, quarterly plans, or whatever it is. We have to break those traditional boundaries of how we look at things.
Oh, that's a really great answer. Thank you.
So this feels like a nice opportunity just to mention. So Tracy, I'm bridging between professional coaching and agile coaching, as many colleagues here are, but I'm stupidly doing it as a doctoral research project as well. It's 20 years since the signing of the Agile Manifesto, and as part of that celebration, that festival, we're doing some research, and we're asking the managers that Agile coaches coach and Agile coaches, we're asking them to take part in a survey. And the survey is all about finding the differences and the commonalities between what we'll think of as professional versus Agile coaching, and then to ask management, what is really impactful for them, because we are a completely unregulated, non-professional offshoot, I suppose, of some IT methodologies. So it does feel in many ways like a bit of a Wild West. So we're doing Agile Coaching Management.com is the survey. I'll pop it in the chat. Really just trying to get some proper research on what's happening in what's happening globally.
Thank you, Ross. I mean, that's great, and it's I smile that you call it the Wild West, because that's how we've described coaching for a long time, and we're sort of saying, well, do you know what, we ought to be coming out of the Wild West now and become a little bit more grown up as a profession, and so from an ICF perspective, coaching is probably moving into more of that space. But I definitely think that it is the research that helps to ground that. And that's where I think, not that I'm trying to do a sales pitch for the ICF or anything tonight, but one of the things that differentiates the ICF from other professional bodies is the amount of global research that they're doing, and really in depth, empirical, as well as industry-based research and scientific research. So I can only encourage that, and in fact, it may well be worth, Russ, you connecting with the research team at the ICF. I'm sure they would be very interested in what you're doing and may actually be able to support you with publicising or getting more input and contribution. So I can put you in touch with someone.
Yes,
on
please.
That. If you want to connect with me or get a message round to me in some way, I can connect you with the research team and see what happens. Can't promise anything, but I would imagine they'd be interested. That's
kind. Thank you, Tracy. And I've put the survey link in the website in the chat there. Please, you guys, do spread that around. And just for anybody that's not been through any professional coaching, this idea of coaching groups and clients and whole organizations as the client, that's not normal within the professional coaching. The client is a sort of somebody with specific objectives. So there are really, really interesting challenges there.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's interesting as well, because this whole space is still evolving and is quite generative, and in a way that's partly why it's probably good that it's not regulated yet. In a way, there is an argument against regulation, because the minute you regulate, you sort of baseline and fix everything, when in fact these professions like Agile and coaching are still evolving and finding themselves. And so I think the idea of self-regulation with some rigor of expectation from the marketplace is quite helpful, along with professional bodies.
Yeah, I mean, it's always...
Go ahead, John.
Hi, Tracy. Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say it's always difficult for regulators to keep up with innovations and changes that take place in industries, isn't it? I'm just sort of struck by what some other people have been saying about the similarities between coaching and Agile. And I think there are a lot of similarities, and it's definitely something that's attracted me to both professions, should I say? I don't know if that's the right word. But yeah, also just listening to your talk, Tracy, I remember when I first came across you at Coaching Development and meeting Philip Brew and Colin Brett there. And the ICF, just the presentation you gave and all the data and the metrics that you've got, it just shows how far coaching has come as well, I think, in the last, well, I guess it is 8 years now. So it's great to see.
Yeah, thank you, John. I was just thinking about that. It feels like a reunion of some old and new friends actually this evening, which is really lovely. Yeah, I mean, don't quote me on this, but it's more or less in those 8 years, I would say the ICF has more than doubled in size. So I mean, it's really, really rapidly growing. When I first got involved with the ICF, I think there were around 7,000 members globally, and we've now got close to 45,000. So, it's huge, absolutely huge. Yeah, so and that's good, because I think that shows the demand
And I think it's the same with the Agile community. I don't know what the numbers are. My God, I don't know who would know that, but it's absolutely, you know, exploded as well, I think.
Definitely.
I think the Agile community is probably about 2.5 million, John.
Is it?
Kareem? And counting.
Exactly.
Who knows?
I'd say bigger than that. The Scrum Alliance members alone is over 1 million. So, and I think Safe is similar. So
They're all connections of Kareem, aren't they?
Jam.
While I'm unmuted, may I please ask a question? Slightly cheating, but I'm going to do it anyway. Sorry. So Tracy, have you seen or have you observed more leaders who not necessarily wanting to be coached, but wanting to learn how to coach, not to become coaches, but to take a coaching approach to leadership? Have you seen that demand growing at all as a pattern?
Yeah, significantly. So there's and this is the huge opportunity actually to take coaching to a more cultural and systemic level. The ICF defines what we call 3 modalities of coaching, which is external coach practitioners, internal coach practitioners, and then managers and leaders using coaching skills. And initially, all we had were external coach practitioners. You just hired a coach in. Then organisations said, okay, we want to have some of that in-house because organisations like to take those things in-house at some point. So we then started to see the growth of internal coaches. And I know we've got one of those with Lauren actually here this evening, who's an internal coach. And then we saw this 3rd modality coming in, which is to say managers and leaders with the influence and impact that they have need to have great coaching skills. And interestingly, if you look at the range of leadership skills across the skill set, coaching is often the weakest muscle. And so there was an enormous opportunity, which is why it's the largest growth area at the moment. And of course, those managers and leaders don't necessarily need to have the same depth and breadth as training as practitioners like ourselves might do, but they do need more than a 90-minute session on a leadership program, which is often what they get. So there is an enormous growth area in that too, and a need for it. Yeah.
Tracy, if I may have a go. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Amit.
Okay, so one of the interesting thing in your slide about perceived risk of untrained coaches has struck me because as we had been speaking about the professional coaches, agile coaches, and various framework or process coaches which have been evolving, and many of the certification and career tracks on ICF also reflect the process coaching that in that context. Typically, any company which is going on a so-called transformation journey, digital transformation usually is coined with it. So there is a TPO or the transformation office which they set up. And how do you see these coaching professionals aligning with that? Or is it anyhow similar to the risk which you mentioned about perceived coaches taking place in that transformation office and then putting blame on the coaching community altogether? Or do they try to do something radically different, which is in the best interest of organization?
Yes, thank you, Amit. So I think what's slightly different with coaching in terms of the purer sense of coaching is that part of the contract is that the ownership for the work very much stays with the individual or the organization. So there's less chance in a way of a coach being blamed, if you like, because something didn't work. Now, you could argue, well, okay, but where's the accountability then on the coach? Because, and this is an argument that organizations probably quite legitimately place, to say if we're spending all this money on coaching and coaches, we want to have some kind of assurance that it's going to have value. And this is where some of the metrics come in. But what is, and as I shared with the HPO criteria, there are a lot of metrics now starting to come through that show how coaching has contributed. The challenge, however, is that it's very difficult to say that a coaching conversation equals a particular outcome, because the outcome could have been as a result of many, many other things. It's unlikely that coaching is going to be the single input to a particular behaviour or a particular decision or something. It's a contributory factor. And so what's really important, I think, when goals and measures of coaching are established, that they are established with the understanding that those goals are achieved through a variety of inputs that have ownership with the client and the organisation, and not just the coach, because coaches are not fixers. You know, that's not our job. But it's, so far in my experience, I mean, as long as coaches contract well and establish appropriate measures of success, then it usually works fine. When things fall down a little bit is when coaches don't contract sufficiently, which is actually one of the biggest competency flaws in coaching. One of the things I notice when teaching, but also, you know, if you look at assessments, when people apply for their credentials, one of the biggest reasons why people fail is because they've not contracted deeply enough. So I think I always say that all roads lead to the contract. So I think that's where the heart of it lies.
Hi, Tracy. I've got a question.
Sorry, Stuart.
Hi.
Hello there.
Oh,
sorry, Stuart. Rochelle's had her hand up for a little while. If that's okay.
I beg your pardon.
Oh, no, that's okay. Mine's a very quick question, Tracy. You mentioned about all this money that they're spending on coaching, wanting to get an ROI on that. And you referred earlier on about the elasticity of the rate of the amount that coaches can charge for their services. And you said that you might be able to expand on that in the Q&A session. So what is there any kind of indication of what that rate is broadly in your mind?
yeah, you know, that is such a can of worms. It really is. It's really hard because, I mean, the global research will say that roughly the average hourly rate for a coaching session, if you're going to go on an hourly basis, is $300. Yeah. Now that figure, to me, I think is a bit meaningless, because you're taking an average of all sorts of economies across the world, which, you know, an average, there's huge extremes within that figure. And also what's interesting is that you might think that economies within the world where they have a lower cost of living or are more economically challenged, you might think that there are lower coaching rates. And it's actually often quite the opposite. So, for example, in some parts of Asia, where, you know, if you actually look at the general cost of living, and then you look at the rates that coaches are charging for their services, it's astronomically high and in a very disproportionate way to the general level of the economy. So it's really, really hard. I know coaches who charge £100 an hour, and I know coaches who charge over £1,000 an hour. So, you know, go figure. It's really, really difficult. But I think some of the rates are levelling out a little bit. It's hard to actually pinpoint to an exact figure, but private coaching, if someone is paying for it out of their pocket, is going to be less. The general rates that I see people charging for that can range from anything between £100 and £200 an hour for private coaching, for people who are just paying for themselves, which we might categorise more as life coaching kind of work. In the corporate space, then hourly rates can go from anything from I mean, the parameters I would put would be £200 to £800 an hour. So that's still a wide bracket. It's still a really wide bracket. And that really depends on, in some cases, the level of people that you're coaching, but also the level of experience and credentials that the coach actually has as well. And of course, the rest of your business experience that you're bringing. So I'm not sure how helpful that is.
No, that's very helpful, actually.
It's really, but you know, the one thing, if that's of any relevance to you and anybody else, is the thing I always really encourage anyone to do is to have a coaching session, be coached on how to set your fee rate. Because your fee rate is very, very tied up with your own sense of value and identity. And so it's not just as simple as looking at a bit of number crunching. It becomes quite a personal thing. And you have to be able to quote your fee without blinking, without losing sleep, and feel that you're valued and that you're not, you know, ripping anybody off. It's got to meet all of those criteria, hasn't it? Which is complex.
I need to get into sales more, it sounds like. Thank you very much.
Probably.
That's great. So I'll pass over to Stuart next, and then I've got a question in text in the chat from Maru. I think that might be all we have time for. But Stuart, if you
okay. So thank you, John. So Tracy, you said on one of your slides that one of the topics leaders are bringing to you is the challenge involved with keeping staff engaged, connected and motivated. How would you say coaching can help with those challenges?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good question, Stuart. So there's a couple of things. First of all, the coaching could help to simply support the leader in thinking about different strategies to engage people. So it could be a very practical conversation around different ways of working, because again, it's about change, isn't it? That leaders are used to engaging and connecting with their teams in a particular way, and suddenly, because it's all virtual, you know, all of those strategies don't work. So sometimes it really is just about the practical discussion to help them brainstorm and think through other strategies. The other part of it, though, is to which I've noticed is a bit of a deeper inquiry, which is, what does that connection and engagement mean? So it's not just the practical mechanisms to connect people physically. It's also, what do we mean by engagement? What do we mean by connection? Because those things are starting to mean something different to us now that we're in this virtual world to what those things meant before. So that's probably the more interesting coaching conversation, actually, is what do we mean and expect and need by these terms: connection, engagement, motivation.
Thank you.
Thank you. And a question from Maru. So hopefully I'm saying your name right. I apologize if I'm not. But if coaches have such a diverse spectrum of skills, how can clients go a step closer to selecting the right coach for them?
Oh, wow, that's a really good question, isn't it? So, well, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, I think qualifications, credentials, credibility are really important, you know, so that having a coach that has been trained with a reputable organisation, has a well-known and reputable qualification, is subscribing to a code of ethics, is you know, taking steps to professionalize their services by having professional indemnity or all sorts of things like that, is engaged in CPD. All of that you can sort of verify almost on a CV or something. But the other bit I think that's really important is that coaching is about relationship. And if you look at a lot of the coaching psychology research, it will indicate and point to that much more than 40% of the success of any coaching relationship is going to be down to the quality of the relationship between the coach and their client. So you could have 6 coaches all lined up that are all just the creme de la creme of coaching, but one of them will be the right coach for you, or maybe 1 or 2 of them could be the right coach for you. So I would really encourage, you know, those horrible chemistry sessions, or beauty parades, as we call them in the business. But they're a good opportunity for you to see, could we actually really work together? Because the most important thing is that there is trust and safety and openness, so that the person feels that they can actually open up the complexity of their own thoughts and feelings without being judged, you know, or compromised in any way. So relationship is king, I think.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Tracy, for taking time out of what I know has been a very long day and is not yet done. For me, the one thing that still stands out is you mentioning a lazy coach, or, you know, sort of Hillary's term for that coach who provides space, which just harks all the way back to Hillary did my training a while ago. And all I can remember sort of when you say a lazy coach is coaches don't do. And it's like, surely that's the best type of coach. The coach that gets them to do it, get them to do all the work. But thank you very much. It's been great. Thank you to everybody for turning up, for your questions, for the conversation. Before I close out, Tracy, I'd like to offer you the opportunity. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Oh, other than just thank you very, very much. I love talking about these things. As you can probably tell, I'm quite passionate about coaching. I really believe that it has an important role to play. And I'm so excited to have the opportunity to step into the Agile community, because I think there's an enormous opportunity for that, you know, the coaching and the Agile piece to really come together even more than perhaps it has done, to add value to the world, really. So thank you so much. I feel like we could have gone on forever, a few more questions, but it's important to honour our time boundaries as well. So thank you, everyone.
Before we do, John, can I just highlight how great your book is, Tracy? Your ICF, the behaviours and the competencies. It's a really great book if you haven't seen it and you've got to learn those. It's really easy to read. I found it easy to read. So she's too modest to plug it herself, but I found it a really helpful book. So thank you so much for writing that.
Thank you, Rochelle. You can see I'm not a salesperson either. I don't like sales. I just like talking about this stuff. So
you need to, well, there it is. And if people don't believe, there's 2 here. So I'm pretty sure everyone's got one, but if you haven't got one, it's not, I mean, unlike Rachel, for me, it's not a reading book. I don't read it. I use it as a reference guide, because it's got all the competencies, it's got workbook sections, it's got scenarios where you can use types of questions to guide. So I haven't read it back front to back, but I've covered several sections of it. It's a great book.
I love you've got a spare copy, because I've come up to Stratford and I've left my copy in Kent. It's been posted to me. So
I'm not on any commission, full disclosure here. I don't get any kickback from Tracy. But if there's any honor that needs to go where it's due, you know, Tracy all day long, you know, what can I say? Without actually wanting to, you know, embellish too much. She's the right person to go to.
I'm going to jump in there. If we want to stay back and run the Tracy Appreciation Society, I'm all for it. But maybe we pause and let some people drop off. So I've just seen the details for the book. We'll absolutely get those out. Thank you for everybody coming out. This has all been recorded. I can't remember if I said that at the start, but it's up in the corner telling you it's been recorded as well. We'll get that up on YouTube. Our good guy George there does magic with videos. He'll get that ready for us. We'll get it posted and shared. As at the same time, we'll definitely get the book details out to everybody. Little plug for the next one, though it feels a bit weird because, like many of you, I'm not a salesperson, but I'm up on the next one. So I invited one of my mentors, Joseph Pelrine, to join. He, as any good coach will do, turned it back on me. So it'd be lovely to see people come along and join Joseph and myself having a chat about the weirdness that happens in our head. So it will be about complexity, it'll be about coaching and Agile and all things leadership and capability building. And think of it like we've got a drink in a bar, which is often where Joseph and I end up. But thank you very much. Thank you again, Tracy. It's been great. Some great insights there. And brilliant data. Have a lovely evening, everybody. And I hope to see you all again soon.